Alrighty, well, good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining Ardham Technologies and Cloudflare for this morning's webinar. We're very excited to share insights on how consolidating vendors with ZTNA can strengthen your security and simplify management. My name is Alyssa Magianis. I am the marketing associate at Ardham Technologies. For those who may not be familiar with Ardham, we are a full-service IT solutions integrator. Our success is built on strong relationships with trusted partners like Cloudflare, which allows us to deliver reliable, secure solutions that help your business run smoothly. And I'm going to pass it over to Cloudflare to share more.
Hi, my name is Matthew Bachnovitz. I am a solutions engineer here at Cloudflare for public sector. I've been working with Cloudflare for over a year and a half now, and it's been a really great thing to be a part of. So what we'll talk about today is just some high-level things about zero trust, and we'll talk a little bit about like the general use cases, talk about some kind of how it compares to legacy stuff. We'll do a tiny bit of a demo. Feel free to interrupt me during this. I probably won't be able to see the chat, to be honest with you, because I'll be going through a few slides, but we'll go from there. So let's start off with this slide right here. I'm going to give two real quick slides just to drive a little bit of context. The first is Cloudflare has this massive global network. And what's important about it is that we run all our own hardware, our metal, and all our own fiber in all these different locations. We do not rely on hyperscalers like AWS and GCP to deliver our services. So this is all our stuff. Therefore, we can put all this capacity to work for that for you guys, and every service we have runs everywhere. So that means we don't have specific locations for DDoS scrubbing versus zero trust versus whatever. They're all running everywhere. And so that makes it really adaptable and allows us to be efficient and use our capacity really well. So we're doing all this activity near where your end users live. At a very high level, we provide a lot of different types of services. In most cases, people know us for our application services like DNS and WAF and DDoS and layer 7 DDoS protection. That's good stuff. Fantastic. The next phase of the conversation typically talks about zero trust services. So now we're talking about ZTNA and Secure Web Gateway. We do have a good email product, things like that. So now the zero trust service is focusing on protecting your users and connecting them. We also do things like network services. So let's do, for example, connect your various data centers together using the Cloudflare as the backbone, or we'll advertise your /24 or larger IP addresses. We'll scrub it from a DDoS perspective and tunnel that traffic back to you. The last part of it is really that developer platform. So it's the ability to run serverless code at the edge near your users. We'll do AI inference and AI security on top of all those things. We have a bunch of services behind there to support things like object storage, key value pairs, databases, image, and media streaming. So at a very high level, zero trust is an important, but just one part of what Cloudflare does and how we leverage that big network to do all these things. So let's start with talking a little bit on the left-hand side about how traditional networks are really built out in a legacy sense. What you typically have is you have on this left-hand side over here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, whoops, don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but over here you have your remote users, typically on a VPN. And what this means is they VPN in here and then they have access to all these different things from a network perspective that they may or may not need. In addition, you have a bunch of private tunnels, a lot of different stuff that doesn't have a lot of granularity around the ability to control it. Often these remote users are going to like a central place here before they go back out to the internet, so they're forced to come back to that campus. What we talk about with Cloudflare is we're able to be that middleman for all these different types of transactions. And we'll kind of get into what those transactions are right here. So let's start with Secure Web Gateway. Secure Web Gateway, okay, I have my end user devices, I have specific locations and specific offices. What I'm going to do is instead of putting it back to my primary data center and having everyone hairpin through that, have these users connect to a Cloudflare instance close to where they are. And then we then use the muscle of that Cloudflare platform to provide access controls, to add threat protection, to do all these rules in a centralized way so that we can control where these users are going and what they can do with it. So you're going to have a bunch of different resources here. And then when we talk about the other part of this, we're talking about zero trust network access. So really it's VPN replacement or at least a functional equivalent. What we're able to do here is within these end user devices, then tie identity and device posture into what they can access on the inside of your network. Now, what is important about all of this is it's all happening in one platform in one set of controls. So it's very typical that there's a zero trust network access that controls kind of a VPN replacement, and it's very common that there's a separate gateway. What you're seeing with Cloudflare is this bottom box right here that can control the DNS layer, the network layer, and the HTTP layer. Those controls apply regardless of whether you're going to the internet or whether you're going to the inside of your network. So what you've now done is have one cohesive set of controls that everyone goes through with minimal overhead. Why is it so minimal overhead? Because the Cloudflare D tunnel that we use to access the internal network of your resources is very lightweight because all the processing is really being done in the Cloudflare network here in this gateway control. And same thing with the Warp client. If you have this device with the Warp agent, this is really mostly just a tunnel. And so all the processing of, oh, am I allowed to go to this place? Am I going to do TLS decryption for HTTP? Am I going to do all these various things? All that's really executing at the gateway. And when the user is connecting to Cloudflare, what we're seeing is they're connecting to the closest location to them because of our Anycast network, therefore driving down latency and really increasing performance. And all this tied into an IDP. The other part I'll touch on kind of briefly here is this access piece on top. Now, what this access piece on top is really doing is having a web app and putting an IDP in front of it. This becomes really, really handy for things like contractor access. So instead of issuing them VPN credentials to get into your network, we're going to assign them a specific application that they can log into and do it without having a client involved. So they just use that IDP, log into this, and they can get to the very specific things they need to get to on your internal network. We also have the ability within this product to do things like browser SSH and browser RDP. So they're not just limited to web apps and getting at your internal resources. Now that you've done that with this clientless device, you've given this contractor access, super easy to then take it away for only the time they need it. Zero trust is essentially about giving your users, both internal and external, access to the things they need and only the things they need for what they need to do their job on all these different layers. Assume that they are kind of a bad entity. Just because you're on the network doesn't mean you should have access to things. And the overall solution is about saying, hey, by default, we block everything, and then we only allow you to get the things you need to do. So before I kind of show the interface a little bit, are there any questions or things that people are curious about or make sure that you want me to touch on? All right. So let's quick pivot into here. And what we'll show is this is the zero trust dashboard right here. This is kind of the beginning page of it. It's going to give you a bunch of metrics. They're all very, very pretty. We like it a lot. Usually you have up to 30 days of analytics within this. We talked a little bit about Gateway. So let's talk about it from a ZTNA, excuse me, a secure web gateway perspective first. So what I'm going to do is there's going to be a lightweight client on your end user devices, typically. This client supports iOS, Android, Chromebooks, Mac, Linux, and Windows. So it'll cover virtually anything that's there. What I'm going to be able to do with, for example, DNS policies is I'm going to be able to select, hey, I have various categories, security categories. I'm going to go block those, right? And here's kind of the expression of how this works. I'm going to select the security category, and Cloudflare will continue to update, keep these groups updated. What I'm not going to do is block anything right here from a company application domain. So if you have internal domains, things like that, we can make sure not to block those. If we go back up here, we'll see that there are three different levels. There is DNS, there is network, and there is HTTP. When I'm looking at all these controls, I'm able to get very granular about what I care about. So if I specifically want to take a look at here, this is saying, hey, I will, if the destination IP is this and the user is this, I'm going to do this specific thing. What I can do as well is have a default block action at the bottom and specify what users can access which destination IPs and ports and protocols across the spectrum for their device. Same thing from an HTTP perspective. So we have the ability to do TLS decryption. So we become kind of that man in the middle between the end users and the internet. We will have you install a root certificate that is generated for you specifically. We will then be able to see the full transactions of HTTP and then allows you to do a bunch of cool, interesting things. One of those interesting things is remote browser isolation. So with remote browser isolation, what it's going to allow you to control is that for these specific applications or these content categories or these domains, I'm going to select isolate. What that will do, the user will click on a link, they will get moved to a remote browser isolation session on the Cloudflare Edge. So the Cloudflare Edge is actually running a browser session and then streaming that content back to the end user. The reason this is important is two things. Number one, if they go to a risky site and there's some kind of malware on it, that malware detonates on the Cloudflare Edge and not on your end user's machine. So it's really preventing the risk of going out to a risky site, clicking on something, and now your computer's infected with malware. Number two, you are able within this to select what users can do within that session. So if I want to prevent copying and pasting within that remote session, I can go do that. And I'm going to show you kind of what this looks like. So this right here is the Cloudflare blog. And internally, we run it all through our isolation browser. So you can see it works generally well, like nothing too crazy is happening here. I can tell I'm in a browser isolation session by this context menu. It's different than my normal browser. But I can come through here, click through all this stuff, and it's very similar to being a native session, just with more security kind of piled on top of there. There's a ton of other things we can do too. So let's look at, for example, egress policy. If I want dedicated egress for my web traffic to go outside, I can do that. I can select resolver policies. So if I need specific DNS requests to be handled in a specific way to specific servers, this is where I would define that. These same policies that define access to external resources can also define access to your internal resources. So if you have, for example, an ERP system and that only the finance people or whoever should be available to that system, these are the same kind of controls you use to control internal access. typically you have a big user subnet and then you're poking holes on firewalls internally and you're trying to manage who can get to what from a network perspective. Well, you can define all of that here because Cloudflare is the middleman in that transaction. When we talk about clientless applications, let's talk about what that looks like. So what I'm doing here is defining, for example, wiki.skyflash.co. I'm saying that I want to put an IDP in front of our internal company wiki. When I do that, I can make this application maybe available to the internet, but make sure that anyone who tries to connect to it is authenticating through my IDP. Like we kind of mentioned before, it's a great story for contractor access and external access where maybe it's not as sensitive. You can do so when we see people do VPN replacements, we often see them, okay, yeah, there's a group of users who are doing a full client install. And that we can control device posture and look at a bunch of other things. But when they get to, wait a second, do I really need these resources to be only available on county-owned or institution-owned devices? Well, maybe not. This is where this access part comes in. As we can see, this is just a way to define, hey, I want to use this application as a browser RDP session. I want to use this as a browser SSH session, all managed in one central control plane. Everything's here. The last part I'll touch on is, well, how do we get to those internal resources? How does the Cloudflare network find a way into your internal network? And for that, we have tunnels. So tunnels are you install a small daemon on the inside of your network, and that daemon calls out to Cloudflare. So you're not poking holes in your external firewall, letting things in. You're allowing something inside to call back out to Cloudflare. So when we look at this tunnel, there's a couple interesting things here. Number one, published application routes. What this is telling me is that for the public DNS entry intranet skyflash.co, right, my public application route, I can get to that resource by going to the Cloudflare tunnel is going to look at this right here as the address it's going to use to access that internal resource. Therefore, creating that chain from the public back to Cloudflare, back to the tunnel and the internal resource. The other interesting things here is the CIDR. So we talked briefly about VPN replacement and being able to define who can access what ports and protocols. Well, this is answering the question, how do I define where those ports and protocols exist at the end of the day? So right here, this is saying this tunnel specifically is responsible for being able to access this specific internal IP address. Therefore, I can say, hey, when I want to get to this internal thing, use this tunnel, and it's defined at a tunnel level. And obviously you can have a ton of different types of tunnels, different locations with different resources. They are also hyper scalable and hyper redundant. So when we go in here, we can see, I don't know if this one has it, but you can create this tunnel, deploy as many copies of it internally as you want. So if one of those copies goes down, the rest of them are still up and running and will be used by Cloudflare. And that at a very high level is kind of what we're really talking about here. We also have obviously some analytics and dashboards that you can see. So you have various types of reports that people care about. So you can look through all this stuff. In addition, there are tons of ways to look at logging. So we have admin logging in terms of what policies were changed by who. We have access logs. So this is that access product, that clientless IDP product we're talking about. Taking a look at all the logs here. We have the gateway logs on different levels here. So we have DNS logs, network logs, HTTP logs. And then on top of all that, we're able to do something called log push. So we'll be able to push these various logs to various places if you have a SIM that you want to aggregate logs in. It's very flexible. There's very few things we can't connect to. That is the end of kind of what I have for this piece of the presentation. Are there any questions, any topics in Zero Trust you want to talk about, or anything I can clarify? Awesome. Then I will kick it back to our host.
Alrighty, well, thank you all for joining us this morning. We appreciate you taking the time to be part of this discussion.